Neil Diamond's first performance at school made his principal feel faint with emotion, and what happened next changed the trajectory of his entire life. In this video, you'll discover what song the young Neil performed that moved his principal to tears, why this shy Brooklyn kid almost didn't perform at all, and how one school talent show became the moment that launched one of music's greatest careers. Stay until the end, because what the principal did after that performance proves that sometimes one person believing in you can change everything. Brooklyn, New York, May 1957. Erasmus Hall High School was one of the oldest and most prestigious public high schools in Brooklyn, with a history dating back to 1787. The building itself was impressive, with Gothic architecture, high ceilings, and long corridors that echoed with the footsteps of thousands of students. Among those students was a 16-year-old boy named Neil Diamond, a quiet, introverted kid who spent most of his time alone, sitting in the back of classrooms, writing in notebooks that he never showed anyone. Neil didn't have many friends. He wasn't athletic, he wasn't popular, he wasn't the class clown or the student council president. He was just a shy kid from a working-class Jewish family who felt invisible most of the time. Neil's parents, Akiba and Rose Diamond, had immigrated from Poland and Russia. His father worked as a dry goods merchant, struggling to make ends meet in the tough economic climate of post-war Brooklyn. His mother was a homemaker who worried constantly about money and about Neil's future. They wanted him to become a doctor or a lawyer, something stable and respectable that would guarantee financial security. The last thing they wanted was for their son to pursue something as impractical and unreliable as music. But Neil had discovered something that made him feel less invisible. Music. Specifically, songwriting. He had started writing songs when he was 14 years old, inspired by the rock and roll he heard on the radio. Artists like Elvis Presley and Little Richard, who were revolutionizing popular music in the mid-1950s. Neil would sit in his small bedroom in his family's cramped Brooklyn apartment, door closed, and write song after song in his notebooks. He wrote about loneliness, about feeling like an outsider, about dreams of something bigger than the narrow streets of Brooklyn. He had taught himself to play guitar using a cheap instrument his parents had reluctantly bought him for his 15th birthday. Neil wasn't naturally talented at guitar. His fingers were clumsy at first and the chords sounded rough, but he practiced obsessively. Hours every day after school, ignoring his homework, ignoring his parents' complaints that he was wasting time, just him and his guitar and his notebooks full of songs that nobody had ever heard. At Erasmus Hall High School, there was an annual spring talent show that had been a tradition for decades. It was a big event, held in the school auditorium with hundreds of students and teachers attending. Students would perform all kinds of acts, singing, dancing, comedy sketches, magic tricks, anything to entertain their peers. For most students, the talent show was just fun, a chance to show off or get attention. But for Neil Diamond, the 1957 talent show represented something much more significant. It was a test. Could he actually perform in front of people? Could he share the songs he had been writing in secret? Could he be something other than the invisible kid in the back of the classroom? Neil had never performed publicly before. The idea terrified him. He was shy to the point of being almost paralyzed in social situations. The thought of standing on stage in front of hundreds of people, holding his guitar, singing his own songs, made him physically sick with anxiety. But there was something inside him, a voice that said he had to try, that if he didn't take this chance, he would regret it forever. So in April of 1957, 1 month before the talent show, Neil signed up. He wrote his name on the sign-up sheet outside the music room and immediately wanted to erase it. What was he thinking? He couldn't do this. He would humiliate himself. Everyone would laugh at him. For the next month, Neil was a wreck. He couldn't sleep properly. He barely ate. His mother asked him if he was sick. His teachers noticed he seemed even more distracted than usual. Neil practiced his song obsessively in his bedroom, playing it over and over, trying to get every note perfect, trying to build up the courage he knew he would need. The song he had chosen to perform was one he had written himself, called Solitary Man, though he would later rewrite and perfect it years after this first performance. The song was about loneliness, about being different, about choosing to walk your own path even when it meant being alone. It was deeply personal, basically Neil's autobiography in 3 minutes of music. The week before the talent show, Neil seriously considered backing out. He could just not show up on the day of the performance. He could pretend he was sick. Nobody would care. Nobody even knew who he was anyway. But his music teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Hartman, a woman in her 50s who had taught at Erasmus Hall for 20 years, pulled Neil aside one day after class. She was one of the few teachers who had noticed Neil's talent because he occasionally participated in music class, though always reluctantly. "Neil," she said gently, "I heard you signed up for the talent show. Are you really going to perform?" Neil looked down at his feet and mumbled, "I don't know. Maybe. Probably not." Mrs. Hartman put her hand on his shoulder. "Neil, I've been teaching music for 20 years. I've had thousands of students. Most of them can carry a tune, some of them are quite good. But you have something different. I've heard you humming melodies when you think nobody is listening. I've seen your notebooks that you're always scribbling in. You have a gift, Neil, but a gift means nothing if you're too afraid to share it. I know you're scared. Every real artist is scared. But you have to push through that fear. Because if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been." Neil looked up at Mrs. Hartman with tears in his eyes. Nobody had ever told him he had a gift before. Nobody had ever encouraged him to pursue music. Her words planted a seed of courage that would grow just enough to get him on that stage. May 15th, 1957. The day of the talent show. Neil woke up that morning feeling like he was going to throw up. His hands were shaking as he got dressed. He barely touched his breakfast, his mother fussing over him, asking again if he was sick. Neil took his guitar to school, carrying it in a case that was almost as old as he was. All day during classes, he couldn't concentrate on anything. He just stared at the clock, watching the minutes tick by toward 3 p.m. when the talent show would begin. Other students who were performing seemed excited, laughing with their friends, confident and relaxed. Neil felt like he was walking toward his execution. The talent show began at 3 p.m. in the school auditorium. The auditorium at Erasmus Hall was beautiful, with ornate details, velvet seats, and a large stage with heavy red curtains. It could hold about 800 people, and on this afternoon it was nearly full. Students, teachers, even some parents had come to watch. Neil sat in the back row, his guitar case clutched in his sweating hands, watching act after act go on stage. There was a girl who sang a popular song from the radio, pretty good but nothing special. There was a group of boys who did a comedy sketch that got a lot of laughs. There was a dancer, a magician, a kid who played trumpet. All of them seemed so confident, so comfortable on stage. Neil felt his courage draining away with each performance. He couldn't do this. He should leave now before his name was called. Then he heard it. The Master of Ceremonies, a senior student who was popular and charismatic, announced, "Next up we have Neil Diamond performing an original song." Original song. Those words echoed in Neil's head. Everyone else had performed covers of popular songs or standard talent show acts. Neil was about to perform something he wrote himself, something personal, something that came from his soul. He stood up on shaking legs and walked down the aisle toward the stage, his guitar case banging against his leg. Students he passed didn't even look at him because they didn't know who he was. Neil climbed the stairs to the stage, the lights bright and hot. The sea of faces in the audience suddenly very real and very terrifying. Neil walked to the center of the stage and opened his guitar case with trembling hands. He took out his guitar and put the strap over his shoulder. He approached the microphone that had been set up, and for a moment he just stood there frozen. The audience was getting restless, some whispers and giggles starting to spread. Neil looked out at all those faces and felt panic rising in his chest. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't do this. Then, in the third row, he saw Mrs. Hartman, his music teacher. She was looking right at him with an expression of calm encouragement. She nodded slightly, a gesture that said, "You can do this, I believe in you." Neil took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and began to play. The opening chords of his song rang out in the auditorium, and something magical happened. The moment Neil started playing, the fear began to melt away. His fingers, which had been shaking moments before, found the chords naturally. Then he started to sing, and his voice, that distinctive voice that would one day sell hundreds of millions of records, filled the auditorium. The song was Solitary Man, raw and unpolished compared to the version he would record years later, but honest and emotional and real. Neil sang about being alone, about not fitting in, about being okay with being different, because at least he was being true to himself. Every word came from his heart. The audience, which had been restless and chatty through some of the previous acts, went completely silent. Students who had been whispering to friends stopped and listened. Teachers who had been grading papers in the back looked up. There was something about this shy kid with the guitar, something about his voice and his song that commanded attention. Neil kept his eyes closed for most of the performance, too scared to look at the audience, just pouring everything he had into the song. When he hit the chorus, his voice got stronger, more confident. He meant every word he was singing because he was singing about his own life, his own feelings. In the audience, sitting in the front row of the balcony section, was the school principal, Dr. Abraham Edelstein. Dr. Edelstein was 62 years old, a respected educator who had been principal of Erasmus Hall for 15 years. He had seen thousands of students pass through his school, had attended dozens of talent shows over the years. He was a practical man, not particularly emotional, known for being stern but fair. He had come to the talent show as a duty, to show support for the students, but he hadn't expected to be moved by any of the performances. They were just kids doing kid things, nothing particularly special. But when Neil Diamond started singing, something happened to Dr. Edelstein. He felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a kid singing a song. This was art. This was a voice that came from somewhere deep, from pain and loneliness and hope all mixed together. Dr. Edelstein had served in World War II before becoming a teacher, had seen death and suffering, had experienced the full range of human emotion. He thought he was beyond being surprised or moved by a high school talent show, but sitting there listening to this 16-year-old boy sing, Dr. Edelstein felt tears forming in his eyes. His throat tightened with emotion. He gripped the armrests of his seat because he actually felt faint, dizzy with the unexpected power of what he was witnessing. If you had been in that audience that day, watching a shy student perform his own song for the first time, do you think you would have recognized you were witnessing the beginning of something special? Share your thoughts in the comments. Neil finished the song, playing the final chord and letting it ring out in the silent auditorium. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Neil opened his eyes, terrified that the silence meant everyone hated it, that he had humiliated himself. Then the applause started. It began with Mrs. Hartman clapping enthusiastically in the third row, then spread to the students around her, then to the entire auditorium. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, giving Neil Diamond a standing ovation. Students were cheering, teachers were applauding, and up in the balcony, Dr. Edelstein was standing with tears streaming down his face, clapping harder than he had clapped for anything in years. Neil stood on stage in shock. He couldn't believe what was happening. These people who had never noticed him before, who had walked past him in the hallways like he was invisible, were cheering for him. For his song, for his music. Neil felt something shift inside him in that moment. The fear and insecurity that had defined his entire life started to crack. Maybe he wasn't worthless. Maybe he did have something to offer the world. Maybe his parents were wrong and music wasn't just a waste of time. The applause went on for almost 2 full minutes, far longer than for any other act that day. When Neil finally walked off stage, his legs were shaking again, but this time from exhilaration rather than fear. After the talent show ended, Dr. Edelstein immediately went backstage looking for Neil. He found him packing up his guitar, still in a daze from what had just happened. "Neil Diamond," Dr. Edelstein said, his voice still rough with emotion. Neil looked up, startled, wondering if he was in trouble for some reason. The principal continued, "I need to speak with you. Come to my office tomorrow morning before classes start." Neil's heart sank. Even after the success of the performance, his default assumption was that authority figures were disappointed in him. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Dr. Edelstein saw the fear in Neil's eyes and softened his tone. "You're not in trouble, son. I just want to talk to you about what I witnessed today." The next morning, Neil nervously knocked on the principal's office door. Dr. Edelstein called him in and gestured for him to sit. The principal's office was intimidating. with dark wood furniture, diplomas and certificates on the walls, and shelves full of serious-looking books. Neil sat in the chair across from the principal's desk, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Dr. Edelstein looked at Neil for a long moment before speaking. "Neil, I have been an educator for 35 years. I have been principal of this school for 15 years. In that time, I have seen approximately 8,000 students graduate from Erasmus Hall. Some have become doctors, lawyers, businessmen, teachers, all kinds of successful professionals. But yesterday, when you performed your song, I witnessed something I have never witnessed before in all my years in education." Dr. Edelstein paused, and Neil saw that the principal's eyes were glistening again, just like they had been during the performance. "Neil, you have a gift that is extremely rare. You have the ability to move people emotionally through your music. Yesterday, when you were singing, I felt faint, actually dizzy. I am a 62-year-old man who has seen combat in war, who has experienced every imaginable human emotion, and a 16-year-old boy with a guitar made me feel something so powerful that I almost couldn't handle it. Do you understand what that means?" Neil shook his head, still not quite believing what he was hearing. Dr. Edelstein leaned forward. "It means you have real talent, Neil. Not the kind of talent where someone is good at singing popular songs or can play an instrument competently. You have the talent of an artist, someone who can create something original that touches the human soul. I know your parents probably want you to pursue a practical career. I know the world will tell you that music is too risky, too unstable. But Neil, I'm telling you as someone who has lived a long life and seen many things, if you don't pursue this gift, if you let fear or practicality stop you from developing this talent, it would be a tragedy not just for you, but for all the people who will never get to hear your music." Neil felt tears rolling down his cheeks. For the second time in 2 days, someone was telling him his music mattered. Dr. Edelstein continued, "I am going to do something I have never done for any student before. I am going to personally write letters of recommendation for you to every music school and scholarship program I know. I am going to call in every favor I have in the educational system to help you find opportunities to develop your songwriting and performing. And I am going to call your parents myself and explain to them that their son has a gift that should not be wasted." Dr. Edelstein kept his word. He wrote passionate letters of recommendation for Neil, describing the talent show performance in emotional detail, arguing that Neil Diamond was a rare talent who deserved support. He personally called Neil's parents and spent over an hour on the phone explaining why they should encourage their son's musical pursuits, rather than forcing him toward medicine or law. Akiba and Rose Diamond were skeptical at first, but the principal's conviction and the story of how their son's performance had moved him to tears made them reconsider. They didn't fully understand it, but they agreed to let Neil pursue music, at least for a while, to see where it led. Mrs. Hartman, the music teacher, also became one of Neil's champions. She arranged for him to perform at more school events, helped him refine his songwriting, and connected him with local musicians who could teach him more advanced guitar techniques. She saw in Neil what Dr. Edelstein had seen, a diamond in the rough, someone whose talent just needed nurturing and opportunity to shine. Within months of that talent show performance, Neil was performing regularly at small venues around Brooklyn, building confidence, honing his craft, becoming the performer he would eventually become. Neil graduated from Erasmus Hall in 1958 and received a fencing scholarship to New York University. Fencing was something Neil had unexpectedly excelled at in high school, his only athletic achievement. But while at NYU, he spent more time writing songs and performing in Greenwich Village folk clubs than he did on his studies or fencing. He dropped out after his freshman year to pursue music full-time, a decision that horrified his parents, but which he felt compelled to make after everything Dr. Edelstein and Mrs. Hartman had told him about his gift. The road to success was not easy or quick. Neil struggled for years, writing songs that were rejected by record labels, performing in tiny clubs for almost no money, facing constant rejection and doubt. He got his first songwriting break in 1962 when he was hired as a staff songwriter in the Brill Building, the center of the music industry in New York. He wrote songs for other artists, learning the craft, paying his dues. His first hit as a songwriter came in 1965 when Sunday and Me reached number 18 on the charts, performed by Jay and the Americans. In 1966, Neil started recording his own songs and Solitary Man, the song he had first performed at the Erasmus Hall talent show 9 years earlier, became his first charting single as a performer. From there, Neil Diamond's career exploded. Cherry Cherry in 1966, Girl You'll Be a Woman Soon in 1967, Sweet Caroline in 1969, Cracklin' Rosie in 1970, I Am I Said in 1971, hit after hit after hit. He became one of the best-selling artists of all time. With over 130 million records sold worldwide, he performed in the world's biggest venues, from Madison Square Garden to stadiums holding 50,000 people. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He became a legend. But Neil never forgot that afternoon in May 1957 when he stood on the stage at Erasmus Hall High School, terrified and 16 years old, and performed for the first time. He never forgot Mrs. Hartman, who encouraged him when he wanted to quit. And he especially never forgot Dr. Abraham Edelstein, the principal who felt faint with emotion and then dedicated himself to helping a shy kid pursue an impractical dream. In interviews throughout his career, Neil often talked about that talent show as the moment his life changed direction. He would say, "If Dr. Edelstein hadn't believed in me, if he hadn't fought for me, I don't know if I would have had the courage to pursue music. One person believing in you can change everything." Dr. Edelstein retired from Erasmus Hall in 1968 after being principal for 26 years. Neil, by then a successful recording artist, came to the retirement ceremony and performed Sweet Caroline for the principal who had changed his life. Dr. Edelstein, now 73 years old, sat in the audience crying just like he had cried 11 years earlier at the talent show. After the performance, Neil gave Dr. Edelstein a gold record of Sweet Caroline with an inscription, "To Dr. Edelstein, who saw something in a scared kid that the kid couldn't see in himself. Thank you for believing in me. You changed my life. Neil Diamond." Dr. Edelstein kept that gold record in his living room until he died in 1979 at age 84. Mrs. Eleanor Hartman, the music teacher, retired in 1975 after teaching at Erasmus Hall for 38 years. Neil attended her retirement party and gave her a check for $50,000 to establish a music scholarship fund in her name at the school. The Eleanor Hartman Music Scholarship still exists today, helping students at Erasmus Hall pursue music education. Mrs. Hartman died in 1985, but before she died, she gave an interview to a music magazine where she said, "Of all the students I taught in nearly 4 decades, Neil Diamond was special, not because he was the most talented technically, but because he had something to say. His music came from his soul. That's what makes an artist. I'm proud I was able to encourage him when he needed it most." Erasmus Hall High School is still standing in Brooklyn today, though it's now divided into several smaller schools sharing the same historic building. There's a plaque in the main hallway commemorating famous alumni, and Neil Diamond's name is prominently featured. The auditorium where he performed that life-changing talent show in 1957 is still there, still hosting student performances. Some of the teachers at the school use Neil's story to encourage students who are interested in the arts but afraid to pursue them. The message is simple: you never know what might happen if you're brave enough to share your gift with the world. Neil Diamond is now 83 years old, retired from touring since 2018 due to Parkinson's disease, but still writing music and still grateful for that day in 1957 when he overcame his fear and performed Solitary Man for the first time. In a 2020 interview, Neil said, "I was the most scared I've ever been in my entire life when I walked on that stage at 16 years old, but I did it anyway, and it changed everything." That's my message to young people with artistic dreams. Yes, you'll be scared. Yes, people might not understand, but if you have something inside you that needs to come out, you have to be brave enough to share it. Because one performance, one song, one moment of courage can change your entire life. Higher. This is the true story of how Neil Diamond's first performance at his high school talent show made his principal feel faint with emotion, and how that one afternoon launched one of the greatest careers in music history. It's a story about the power of encouragement, about how one person believing in you can give you the courage to pursue your dreams, about overcoming fear to share your gifts with the world, and about how the scared 16-year-old kid from Brooklyn became a legend. If this story inspired you like it inspired me, let me know in the comments what part moved you most. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about how dreams become reality through courage and the support of people who believe. Neil Diamond's story is a testament to the importance of arts education, the impact that teachers and mentors can have on young lives, and the beautiful truth that sometimes all it takes is one performance, one moment of bravery, to change everything. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end.